Dr. Time, it's so lovely to have you here on the podcast. I've been a big fan and follower for many years, as we were talking a little bit offline before we started recording. And I'm very excited to talk about today's topic. We have referenced it here on the podcast several times. And when you know a lot about this topic, as any topic, you kind of throw some words around and kind of assume that people know what you're talking about, but there's a lot of people who are like, what is leaky gut? What does that term even mean? And for a long time, leaky gut and autoimmune illness and the connection between all of that was very poo-pooed, if for lack of a better word. But there was people arguing that it didn't exist, it was a made-up term. So I'm so glad we have you today to kind of just do a little bit deeper dive into this topic. And as I told you, and my longtime listeners know this, that the main reason why I even got into podcasting and really trying to get information out there is because my own son got ill with an autoimmune disease, which sometimes I question if it is an autoimmune disease, but went through very long duration of digestive distress, and it affected his life completely for about 3 years. So anyway, let's talk about some of these terms and clear up some of the confusion, and then we'll kind of come full circle and talk about how it's relating to, women in perimenopause and menopause. And I mean, really the topic that we're discussing pertains to every single human on the planet. And we all have microbiomes and we all need to take care of them. So let's start with that term leaky gut and just kind of define that a little bit for us, because having some basic knowledge around the microbiome and leaky gut, I think is really important for our listeners.
Okay. First, thanks, Shanna, for being here today, for inviting me on your show. And this is a critically important topic. This is the gateway in the development of every disease. And I don't say that lightly. And I'm going to give you a little background. And within about 8 minutes, you'll fully understand what leaky gut is. For the rest of your life, you'll really understand it. But let me give you a little background that leads up to it. And for that, I'm going to go to my friend and mentor, Professor Alessio Fasano at Harvard. Professor Fasano is a professor of medicine, Harvard Medical School, professor of nutrition, Harvard School of Public Health, the chief of pediatric gastroenterology at Mass General at Harvard, the director of the Celiac Research Center at Harvard, and the director of mucosal immunology at Harvard. That's the lining of your gut, the lining of your brain, the lining of your lungs. That's called the mucosa. And he has 5 titles. Any one title is a lifelong dream for someone at the top of their game. He's got 5. And we think he's going to win the Nobel Prize. We truly do, because it was him and his team that identified the mechanism by which this thing, leaky gut, occurs back in 1997. So for over 25 years, they've been writing on this topic, paper after paper after paper, in medical journals all over the world. And it's irrefutable now. So Professor Fasano is always really careful about what he says. He doesn't want to be misquoted. So his language is always precise. And, when you look at research papers from Fasano, and there's a 400 or 500, I lost count, but there'll be 8 researchers on the paper. And the last one, Alessio Fasano, he put his stamp of approval on it, right? But this one he wrote by himself, all by himself. So that gives you a sense of the importance of the message when this top of the field researcher serving humanity writes a paper by himself. The title of the paper says it all. And I tell you all that background first because you understand, wow, this is a top-notch guy. This is one of the guys in the world. Okay, I'll listen. And the title of the paper is All Disease Begins in the, quote, leaky gut. The role of zonulin, and that's a protein, the role of zonulin in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. Okay, so all disease begins in the leaky gut. And in that paper, and you can Google that paper, All Disease Begins at the quote, Leaky Gut, and you can read it. It's a little geeky, but when you read it a couple of times, it starts to make sense. So the Center for Disease Control tells us that 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. It's always inflammation, except for unintentional injuries, an accident. Everything else is inflammation, everything. And Fasano says, all disease begins in the leaky gut, the role of the protein zonulin in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. Now, wait a minute. You said 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. That's right. And we have Fasano saying all disease begins in the leaky gut. So you put those 2 points together, okay, this is really important to understand. So I'm hoping that your listeners might listen to this again, after the first time, so that you really can tell your spouse in everyday language what I'm about to say. You don't have to be geeky, and I'll avoid that as much as I can. So Professor Fasano talks about the perfect storm in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. And if you ever saw that movie with George Clooney, The Perfect Storm, you know that this storm came from this part of the world, this storm came from this one, and this storm, and they all mixed in the ocean, and they created this perfect storm that was deadly. So it's a mixture of a bunch of things that creates the perfect storm. So Fasano calls this the perfect storm. And there are 5 parts to the development of disease. First is your genetics. And with your genetics, that's the deck of cards that you were dealt in this lifetime. You can't change that. And sometimes doctors say, well, we're going to turn off the genes, we're going to turn. You can't turn genes off. Genes operate on dimmer switches, and you can dim down a gene or you can turn up a gene. For example, you can dim down the genes of inflammation. 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. And you can dim down the genes of inflammation. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are many things that you'll learn. But as an example, it was 1992, I think it was, when we learned that 1 cup of blueberries a day, every day for 3 years, and your brain is working as well as it was 13 years earlier. What? Yeah, because the components in blueberries, what makes them blue, they're called polyphenols, those components in blueberries, they turn on the genes of anti-inflammation in your brain, and they turn down the genes of inflammation in your brain. So you have a little bit every day, your brain's working better because you're dimming down the genes, right? So that's how you think about genes. Okay, I want to dim down the genes that cause inflammation because 14 of the 15 top causes of death are inflammatory diseases. So in my lifestyle, I want to dim down the genes of inflammation, and I want to ramp up the genes of anti-inflammation. Well, how do I do that? Well, that's what you're going to learn, right? So there's a number of steps to that. So that's number 1. Number 2 in the perfect storm of the 5 parts to the perfect storm. Number 2 are environmental triggers. What that means, it's what you're exposed to in your environment that has its hands on the dimmer switch, turning the genes up or turning the genes down. Bottom line, that's it, in terms of understanding environmental triggers. They're just turning up genes or turning down genes. And you want the environment around you that turns up the genes of anti-inflammation. No, I won't go into the geeky stuff. And the most common source of an environmental trigger is what's on the end of your fork. That's most common. So that's where you put your attention to begin with, is what's on the end of the fork. There are other things, like if you live in a moldy house, your breathing mold is going right up to your brain. And we know of the 5 types of Alzheimer's, 60 to 65% of all Alzheimer's is called inhalation Alzheimer's. It's what you're breathing that's causing the inflammation in the brain that's killing off cells, killing off cells, killing off cells. So if you live near a freeway and you're breathing that air, or if you live in a moldy house, that's the environmental trigger that's setting off some of the inflammation in your brain, right? So number two is environmental triggers. And the big job, and you'll hear from Fran Drescher, we'll talk about that in a while, but you'll hear Fran say it's the most important thing you can do is to make your house your safe haven. Get all the toxic stuff out of there and learn what the safe stuff is and the not safe stuff. You know, for example, no one should turn on the dishwasher unless everybody's asleep. So you set it on a timer when middle of the night when everybody's asleep. Why? Because that door, when you lock the door, it's not airtight. And the chemicals that most people are using in their dishwasher detergents are toxic chemicals that cause cancer over time. And when you turn it with that hot water, those chemicals form a gas, and some of the gas leaks out of the dishwasher and it's in the air. You can't breathe or you can't smell it, you can't tell, but it's there in minute dosages. And so you only turn on the dishwasher when everyone's asleep until you learn about healthy dishwashing detergent that doesn't have the bad side effects, right? So
Yeah,
you learn.
I use Truly Free, so.
Exactly. And Truly Free is our executive producer for our event that's coming up.
Wonderful.
And we talk a lot about those products, but that's an environmental trigger, and you learn how to reduce your environmental triggers. That's number two. Number three is when you have environmental triggers over time that are inflammatory, they change the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. So you get too many bad guys and not enough good guys. And anyone that's got any bloating, any gas, any burping, any constipation, any diarrhea, you've got dysbiosis, which is the geek word that means too many bad guys, not enough good guys. So anytime you've got gut symptoms, and even if you don't have gut symptoms, you don't have to have gut symptoms, but that's just a very common wake up, you got a problem here, right? So number three is that you develop this microbiome, and some people have heard there's 10 times more cells of good bacteria in your gut than human cells. And that's true. There's a whole lot more bacteria. My friend and mentor, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, the founder of functional medicine, when I interviewed him, he said, you know, Tom, in 1 teaspoon of poop, there's more bacteria than all the stars in the known universe.
Isn't that crazy?
That's like, what? What?
One teaspoon, right?
It's hard to imagine how much bacteria is in our gut because they're so small, but they're just packed in there. So that's number three is dysbiosis. Too many bad guys, not enough good guys in your gut. Once again, this is the 5 factors in the perfect storm from Fasano at Harvard. And this is what they're teaching at Harvard Medical School right now. And when you have this dysbiosis, too many bad guys, not enough good guys, you create an inflammatory environment in your gut. There's more inflammation in your gut. Whether you feel it or not, the inflammation is there. Now, Mrs. Patient, your digestive system is a tube. It starts at the mouth and it goes to the other end. One big long tube winds around inside your abdomen, and it's about 20, 25 feet long. Now, the inside of the tube is lined with cheesecloth. And so when you take a bite of a hamburger and you chew it 3-4 times and you swallow that glob of meat, you're supposed to chew 15, 20 times, but we chew 3 or 4 and gobble it down. I remember growing up in Detroit, we used to get sliders, which was our term for White Castle hamburgers. They're little tiny hamburgers. We get a dozen, and just one bite and slop them down, right? But so we chew a couple times and then we swallow. That big glob of meat can't get into your bloodstream. It's in the tube, 20, 25 feet long. It's in the tube. And what has to happen, if you think of protein like a pearl necklace, the acid in your stomach undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls, and your enzymes, digestive enzymes that start in your mouth with saliva, that's why you're supposed to chew. These digestive enzymes act as scissors to cut the pearl necklace smaller and smaller and smaller. Snip, 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 until you're down to each pearl of the pearl necklace. That's called an amino acid. Now the pearls go right through the cheesecloth lining the gut and go into the bloodstream. And in the bloodstream, your bloodstream's just a highway, zoom, you're off on the highway of the bloodstream, and everything's going in the same direction, but there's no lanes of traffic. Everything's bouncing around in there like bumper cars at the circus, but it's all going the same way. So once your proteins have been broken down by the scissors, the digestive enzymes, and they get really small, a single pearl, an amino acid, that goes right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. The bigger clumps can't get through. They have to be broken down smaller. That's why your digestive tract is 20 to 25 feet long, because it takes a whole lot longer to digest prime rib than it does a banana, right? So we need time to break it down. Then it gets small enough and it goes right through into the bloodstream. And then your body uses those amino acids as the building blocks for new brain cells, new muscle cells, all of that. Okay, but when you have number 3 of the perfect storm, too many bad guys and not enough good guys, and you create this inflammation in your gut, you tear the cheesecloth. That's number 4. That's called the leaky gut. The inflammation tears the cheesecloth. Now, bigger molecules get through into the bloodstream before they've been broken down small enough. And they get through the tears in the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. Now they're off on the highway. And the immune system says, whoa, what's that? That's not something I can use to make a new brain cell or muscle cell or bone cell. I better fight that thing. Looks like a bug. And now your immune system generates inflammation to kill that big molecule. It's called a macromolecule. That big molecule, now your immune system makes antibodies to fight that prime rib, or to fight that chicken, or to fight that tomato, that piece of tomato that got through the tears in the cheesecloth. And that's number 5 of the perfect storm, chronic systemic inflammation. It's your immune system fighting these big molecules that get through into the bloodstream before they've been broken down small enough. And now you've got this chronic inflammation. 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. So you've got this inflammation because of the leaky gut, number 4 in the perfect storm. And this inflammation, how's it going to manifest? It just depends. If you pull at a chain, the chain always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end. It's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidneys, your skin. Doesn't matter. Wherever the weak link is. And the pull on the chain is inflammation. Always, without exception. The pull on the chain is inflammation. The chain breaks at the weakest link. If you carry the gene for Alzheimer's, that's a weak link in your chain. It doesn't mean that you're going to get Alzheimer's. It means you're vulnerable to getting Alzheimer's. So stop pulling on the chain so hard. Well, what does that mean? Well, if the pull on the chain is inflammation, reduce the inflammation in your body. Well, how do I do that? That's what our event is that we're talking about. It's called the inflammation equation. And it's to educate people on these basic concepts. Now, this is what they're teaching at Harvard Medical School. All disease begins in the leaky gut. And 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. It's always inflammation. Now, that's a mouthful that I just gave you. And it might be difficult to explain that to your husband or to your wife, if you're listening, until you've listened to it one more time. But that's the basics. And this is really PhD level stuff. I mean, doctors are getting their PhDs in this to learn where autoimmune diseases come from. Because if the weak link in your chain is your thyroid, you develop thyroid autoimmune disease. If the weak link in your chain is your brain, you develop depression or anxiety or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. If the weak link in your chain is your skin, you get psoriasis or eczema. It just depends on your genetics and how you live your life. That's called your antecedents. And what that means if you eat tuna fish 2, 3 times a week, you likely have mercury toxicity because most of the tuna has mercury. That's an antecedent. So it's your genetics and how you live. If you live in a moldy house, that's an antecedent. And so your genetics and antecedents determine the weak link in your chain.
It's exciting to hear that this is being taught at Harvard. And
Yes.
I know, as a conventionally trained dietitian, I did not learn any of this. And granted, I graduated 20 some years ago, but these are all concepts I had never heard of until my son got ill. And like we were saying, even 10 years ago, things were very, very different. So it's exciting to hear you're not looked at as a total crazy person when you talk about leaky gut anymore and the inflammatory process. And I think that people are just getting so sick of being sick, and I don't even know how many autoimmune diseases there are at this point, but like you said, they are all stemming from the same thing. So it just depends on what it is that you are going to develop. For me, it's a lot of blood sugar issues. Like that is, where my family, fatty liver, diabetes, and I developed insulin resistance myself, even as, thinking I'm eating really well and exercising and doing all of the conventional standard recommendations. And here I am, a dietitian with pretty severe insulin resistance, wondering why in the world it's so hard to maintain my weight and feel well. So I'm really excited about this docuseries. It's going to be wonderful. And how you described and taught us about the whole cascade of how leaky gut develops, I think is wonderful. And I love the cheesecloth analogy. And I always tell people, yeah, like if you don't chew your food, like that's step number one.
Yeah.
And if you don't have enough stomach acid, you're basically screwed with trying to digest protein. I mean, there's just so many steps. So many people think I eat food, I use it, I poop it out. Like, nope, there's so many things that happen and along the way. So what happens when we eat a food and we have leaky gut and it gets out into the bloodstream? Like, where's the immune response coming from, and how do we start to heal that? Well, let's talk about where is that response coming from, and how do we test? Like, how do we know? I would say the vast majority of us probably have some sort of leaky gut or some degree of it, but how do we know we have leaky gut? Like, I know that they're testing,
Yeah.
and you're up to date on the most recent that we can talk
I
about.
am. I am. I travel the world. I teach all over the world, and I've not been to the Far East in a long time, so I can't speak to Japan or China or Thailand. But in Europe and South America and North America, these are the best tests in the world. That I know. And Mayo Clinic in 2016, they published a paper saying there's a new era in laboratory medicine. And they were talking about this technology called silicone chip technology. Now, the way to understand that, if I told you in 1990 that, in 25 years or so, somewhere around 25, 30 years from now, I'm going to hold this little black thing in my hand about the size of a wallet, and if I just push a couple of buttons on here, I can tell you within 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, that the air particulate matter today in Chicago is 33. It's a good day to exercise outside. But if you were to go to San Diego, it's 64. Do not ride your bicycle outside today. There's too much crud in the air and you'll breathe it in. I mean, I've got the Encyclopedia Britannica in my hand, and I can tell you anything you want to know within 5 or 10 seconds. If I told you that in 1990, you would have thought I was watching too much Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right? Right? It was beyond our understanding of what was possible. The same thing has happened in laboratory medicine. It's beyond understanding for most doctors, the new technology that's out there. Mayo Clinic calls it a new era in laboratory medicine because the tests now are right on the money every single time, 97 to 100% accurate every single time. And most doctors don't even know that the tests that they're using, their accuracy is usually somewhere around 75 to 85%. meaning, it's right 3 out of 4 times, meaning it's wrong 1 out of 4 times, completely wrong. And you never know. You never know unless, and I challenge doctors now on stage all the time, you have to do double blinds. And they just look at me and I say, when you have the nurse draw blood, draw a second tube of blood out of the same arm, same venipuncture, label the second tube Joe Smith, send it to the laboratory and order the same test that you're ordering for the patient, labeled with the patient's name. Don't tell the laboratory. Now you'll have to pay for that second test yourself, doctor, because you can't bill the patient and you can't bill insurance. But when the results come back and you do at least 5 patients, so it'll take you a month or so, depending, but you do 5 patients this way to see how often are the tests exactly the same. And what you will find is that 1 or 2 out of 5 times, 1 or 2 out of 5 times, they're completely different. And you don't know whether to talk to the patient that says the test is normal or the test is really bad. You don't know which one to talk to them about. And it's the same blood. And doctors don't know this. They've never been introduced to this concept. They believe in the laboratories at the hospitals, and they believe in the laboratories they're using in their offices because no one's ever told them to double check, do double blind. But when you do, it's startling and you don't know what to do. I mean, I did this back in 2010, 2011. I was doing this in my practice in Chicago, and it was really disappointing. And so I would tell the patient I had done it when there was a big difference. I'd say, now I have to tell you something I did. I took 2 tubes of blood. Yeah, I remember that, doc. And well, I labeled the second one Joe Smith. And here's Joe Smith's results, and here are your results. And they're completely different, which means the lab's wrong. Well, what do we do, doc? And quite honestly, I don't know, but I'd rather we work on the lab results that say there's a big problem here. And then in a couple months, let's see if you're feeling better. And then let's recheck again so that we don't miss something. Either that, or we take another blood draw now and order the same test again. It's up to you. But that was the problem I was facing in 2010, 11, 12, and I didn't know what to do about it. I talked to my friends and they'd say, and they weren't spending the money personally to order second tests. They said, oh, that's really interesting. And I'd see them a few months later, hey, did you do a double blind? Well, no, not yet, But then in 2016, here comes this paper from Mayo Clinic talking about tests that are really, really accurate. And they're called the Zoomers because you zoom in on the problem. So to test for leaky gut, the most accurate test in the world is called the wheat Zoomer. Now, it looks for wheat and a sensitivity to wheat and gluten, but it also includes the most accurate test for leaky gut available in the Western world today. And when you do that test, you'll find out, and I've done double blinds with the Zoomers, and I've done 5 of them, and every one of them is within 2 to 3%, which is an acceptable margin to work with. So it's called the wheat Zoomer. And there's a dairy Zoomer, egg Zoomer, corn Zoomer, there's lectin Zoomers, there's a bunch of tests depending on what you're looking for. But to test for the leaky gut, it's the wheat Zoomer. And if your doctor won't do that test for you, you can go to my website, TheDr.com, thedoctor.com, just don't spell the word doctor out, and order the tests there. And you can do it with a finger prick. It's that easy now. And it's very, very accurate. So I would suggest everyone consider, because all disease begins in the leaky gut. And so you want to see, do I have this leaky gut? Because if you do, it's pulling on your chain right now. Well, I feel fine. All right. In 6 years, when you've been diagnosed with diabetes, we'll remind you that you were recommended 6 years ago to test for the mechanism causing the inflammation pulling on the chain that has now manifest for you as diabetes.
I have not heard of the Zoomers before. That's interesting. So what is it actually measuring? Is it a food sensitivity type thing or a byproduct, or what is it actually testing for?
Oh, good question. Depending on which Zoomer you're doing. So the wheat Zoomer looks at 26 different components of wheat, which is why it's so comprehensive and great. But then it also includes the section for leaky gut, which means it's looking at actomyosin. That's the the material that the gut is. Mrs. Patient, your cells in the gut, they're tied together with shoelaces. That's the protein called zonulin that Fasano wrote the paper about. And when your shoelaces are untied, it's like high school kids that don't tie their shoes. Their shoes flop around on their feet, right? That's leaky gut. So it tests for zonulin, antibodies to zonulin. It tests for your zonulin level. It tests for actomyosin. It tests for the number one problem that causes inflammation systemically, which is called LPS. It's the exhaust of the bad bacteria in your gut. It tests for that. It's the most accurate test for leaky gut that's out there. So the wheat zoomer looks at leaky gut and 26 components of wheat.
Interesting. I want to get that for sure. Is it an expensive test? You said you
No,
can.
no, it's really cheap. I mean, if you tried to do each one of these markers with the big labs, it would cost you somewhere between $2,800 and I don't know how high it could go when they do insurance prices. They always charge much more if they know they're billing insurance, right? But this test, I think it's $400. I think so. It's really extremely reasonable for the quality and the comprehensiveness of the test.
Okay. So depending on that test, you can say without a doubt, yes, I have leaky gut. And
Right.
interesting that you're testing for the wheat zoomer. So let's talk about, gluten-free a little bit, because we talk a lot about nutrition here. And I know I always, I recommend, and I've heard you say, I can't with 100% like say to everybody, you should all be gluten-free, like you don't want to ever like put yourself in that box. But I always recommend to the students I'm working with, it's to your advantage to go gluten-free, but make it a whole food gluten-free approach, because I feel like most people, like I've been gluten-free since 2016. I feel like most people kind of go through this transition where they're giving up gluten, but they're looking for something that they can substitute with. So they're going from regular buns to gluten-free buns, or regular whatever tortillas to
Oh,
gluten-free.
Shana Hassan, give me a high five. Give me a high five. Come on. Yeah,
Virtually, yes.
that
But then
is so important.
they figure it out, like people like me, I did this, but then I figured out, holy crap, I have insulin resistance. And a
Exactly.
lot of these gluten-free foods probably actually made that worse.
No, they do. They do make it worse.
Yeah. And
There was a
it's so
there was
frustrating because there's all these gluten-free foods out there, but they're absolute crap and toxic. And so yeah, talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, there was a paper that came out of a group in Italy. They looked at 126 or 128, I don't remember, but different gluten-free products. And the glycemic index of over 75% of these products was over 80, which is huge. That's like, Snickers bar is
Well, sugar's
46.
100, so I mean, we're looking at almost as bad as pure sugar. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really bad. Some of them were 120, 115, jaw dropping, gluten free. So as you learn how to eat properly for your body, using the indicators that you learned with your show about metabolic syndrome and all that, if there's a general guideline to follow, there's a really good paper that came out 2 years ago called the Mediterranean gluten-free diet. And a Mediterranean diet, we've all heard about the Mediterranean diet and how good it is for you. But at the bottom of the Mediterranean diet, this is the first paper I've ever seen that did this, and I just wanted to high five these guys for doing it, because it's the basic 101 that everybody has to begin with. At the very bottom of the pyramid, is water. You have to hydrate at least a third of an ounce per pound body weight, a third of an ounce. And if you're sweating a lot because you're doing saunas, which are a good thing, or you're exercising and sweating a lot, can be a good thing, it goes up to a half ounce of water per pound body weight, but at least a third of an ounce per pound body weight. And one of the health habits to get into is when you wake up in the morning, most people, first thing they do is go to the bathroom. After that, next, Go out in the kitchen, get 2 big glasses of water right away. And I use something called Vitality C. It's a powdered vitamin C. And in my wife's glass of water and mine, I put a scoop of Vitality C. It's 4,000 milligrams of an alkaline-based vitamin C. It's great for you. So we get our water. And what you notice after a couple of days, if you forget your water, and when you say something does, oh, I forgot my water. Oh, because you notice you feel different when you do that. So that's at the bottom of the pyramid of the Mediterranean gluten-free diet. And that's fruits and vegetables, and then non-gluten grains and nuts and seeds. But at the very top of the pyramid, the little point at the top is gluten-free products. Every once in a while, having a gluten-free blueberry muffin, fine. Who cares? Or gluten-free toast. Who cares? But it's not healthy for you. It's white paste. It's not enriched. It has no fiber. It's not going to feed the good guys in your gut. It's pure paste. And the bad guys on the gut live on that white paste. So having a little gluten-free product on occasion is fine. But you don't substitute for your old pasta, the new pasta, and you eat pasta 3 times a week. You don't do that. You transition teaching yourself how to eat much healthier and more balanced.
Yeah, because I have had several students who are like, well, I went gluten-free, my blood sugars are worse. Like, well, did you go gluten-free processed food or gluten-free whole food? And so much of the Mediterranean diet, why they're doing such a good job in the Mediterranean areas, because they don't eat processed food. I mean, they eat a lot of good variety and a lot of healthy fats, and they get enough protein, but yeah, they're just taking the processed garbage out.
Right.
So how does leaky gut, a lot of my listeners have blood sugar issues, metabolic issues. So how is leaky gut? You talked about the inflammation component. Anything else that you want us to know about how this whole leaky gut issue, the triggers and all of that is exacerbating our insulin resistance issues?
Yeah.
Is it all
Yeah.
mainly kind of stem back to those same 5 things?
It'll kill you. It'll kill you. The number one cause of death for elders in the hospital is sepsis. Sepsis means really bad infection. The antibiotics don't deal with it. My mother died of sepsis. I know this one really well. And sepsis is just accumulation of LPS over years and years and years in your tissue. It's in your lymph nodes, it's in your liver, it's in your muscles, it's in your skin. That when you have this leaky gut for years and these macromolecules get in, some of the molecules are the exhaust of the bad bacteria in the gut. That, I call it the exhaust. It's called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. And LPS accumulates. Once it gets in the bloodstream, it circulates. Your immune system tries to fight it right away. That's one of the markers on the leaky gut test is, do you have antibodies to LPS? Is your immune system creating inflammation, trying to fight LPS, which is a really good thing to fight this stuff. But when you have a leaky gut, you keep getting more of this in the bloodstream and more of it 24/7 every day. These small amounts of this LPS that accumulates. Fasano, in that paper, All Disease Begins in the Leaky Gut, he talks about the 2 main triggers of chronic systemic inflammation is LPS and gluten. They're the 2, not eggs, not soy, not cheese, not dairy. I mean, you may be sensitive to soy, it's possible, but every single person has this immune response fighting LPS and fighting gluten. Well, Dr. O'Brien, are you saying that everyone should give up gluten? I never say that, because then I sound like a nutcase, a fanatic. But what I do say is that every single person should have the right type of test done to see, is my immune system fighting wheat? And if it is creating this inflammation, pulling on your chain, well, give up wheat and see if the inflammation comes down. And you find it does.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm just trying to hook this all together, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we like compartmentalize a lot of little things and look at like individual systems, but
Right.
we got to look at our bodies as a whole and where all that inflammation comes from. And I know that the docuseries addresses a lot
That's
of,
why we're doing it,
yeah,
right? That's exactly
yeah,
why we're doing it. Because it's the 101 stuff. You have to start with the basics. You have to stop throwing gasoline on the fire
yeah,
because the fire's pulling on the chain. So you have to find out is it gasoline or kerosene?
yeah,
Where
yeah.
is it coming from? Where's it coming from? And that's what you'll learn. It's the trickle sand in the hand soap in your bathroom, right? It's the chemicals in the I don't know what those things are called that you put in the toilet bowl and the blue water,
Oh,
you know, and
yeah.
and you know, and
The
the
toilet
smell.
pads, yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is carcinogenic. Now, there's no evidence that the amount of chemical that you breathe in from the blue water from the toilet bowl is harmful to humans. The way that they get away with that is they had the legislation passed that shows you have to demonstrate that the amount of chemical a person breathes in within 24 hours is toxic to humans. It's not. There is no evidence of that. Or for the dishwasher, there's no evidence of that. The amount that you breathe in is 24 hours. Or the nail polish that a little girl puts on her 10 little fingers and 10 little toes. Well, the phthalates from the nail polish are in her bloodstream in 4 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes, but there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that get into your bloodstream from applying nail polish is toxic to humans. That amount is not toxic, but this stuff accumulates in your body over the years. Now, give me a 5-year-old little girl painting her 10 little fingers and 10 little toes for 20 years. Now she's 25, 30 years old and married and wants to gets pregnant and, hopefully has a healthy pregnancy and a healthy delivery. Chicago, 2016, the 326 pregnant women in the 8th month of pregnancy. They did urine samples measuring phthalates in their urine. Those are the chemicals used to mold plastic and nail polish and many other substances. And they took the results of those urine tests and they put it into fourths. The women with the lowest amount in their urine, the next higher amount, the next, and the highest. They followed the offspring of those pregnancies for 7 years. And when the kids turned 7 years old, they did Wechsler IQ, the official IQ test. Not much in medicine that's all or every, but this was every single child whose mother was in the highest category of phthalates compared to the children whose mothers were in the lowest category of phthalates. Every child in the highest category, their IQ was 7 points lower. 7 points, every one of them. Now, that doesn't mean anything to people until you understand a 1-point difference in IQ is noticeable. A 7-point difference is a difference between a child working really hard, getting straight A's in school, and a child working really hard, getting straight C's. This child doesn't have a chance in hell of ever excelling. Now just go to Google and type in phthalates and neurogenesis, nerve cell growth. Here come the studies. The higher the phthalates, the more inhibition of brain cell development. Well, wait a minute, but why does the government allow this? Because there's no evidence that the amount of phthalates that leach into your bloodstream from applying nail polish is toxic to humans. That tiny little amount is not, and they never touch the Toxic Substance Control Act. Never. The chemical industry pays millions of dollars every year to these war chest campaigns of the senators and representatives to make sure nobody touches the TSCA, the Toxic Substance Control Act, because that's how they get away with this. In
Yeah.
Europe, they have over 20,000 chemicals that are banned. They can't be brought into the country in any form whatsoever. In the United States, we have 12.
Yeah. It's
20,000 versus 12.
yeah, it's mind-boggling how that happens. I'm like, I'm just gonna move to Europe at some point. Because
Well, that's why in the video that you'll see when you register for our event of Fran Drescher, the entire interview with Fran, she talks about how important it is to treat your home as your temple, that this is your sacred place where for you and your family. And I was laughing, when I interviewed her, I said, Fran, you are the only person in the world that I know besides me that does this. And she said, uh-oh, what's this? And I said, when we rang the doorbell and your staff greeted us at the door, they gave us little blue booties, hospital booties to put on our shoes before we could come in the house. And she started laughing and said, yes, yes, my home is my temple.
Yeah.
You're
Don't
not going to bring, because, the neighbor may have put weed killer on the grass last week, and then the rain comes and there's weed killer residue on the sidewalk. And we're walking up the sidewalk, we come up to the house, we walk in the house, we're walking on the carpet. Now the weed killer's on the carpet, and your 8-month-old that's crawling on the carpet gets weed killer in their hands, right? So that's why the Japanese leave their shoes outside. And in our home, you leave your shoes outside, or we have little disposable booties that you can wear.
Yeah.
And Fran will talk about all of that, and you'll hear her just laugh and laugh and then say, treat your body like a temple.
Yes. And what's important to remember, it's a cumulative effect like we talked
Right.
about, and everybody's bucket per se is a little bit different. Some people's buckets are really big and they can accumulate a lot of toxins, and some are really small. Like I look at my husband compared to, like, he has a really big bucket, I think, compared to me, because, and not that he does a lot of things that are destructive to his microbiome, but I'm like, I've never known.
That's really interesting. Excuse me, but that's really interesting because there's another test from the same laboratory with that degree of accuracy called the total tox burden. And
Okay.
when you do that test, you see what your immune system is fighting, even though you feel fine, because we all have neighbors or family members who drop dead at 52 of a massive coronary, or diagnosed with cancer at 38. Just startling kind of results. Well, wait a minute, he was healthy. No, he wasn't. He was just a Sherman tank and didn't feel any of the inflammation causing problems until it was too late.
I'm so
So
glad
the total, I'm sorry?
I said, I'm so glad you mentioned that because I hadn't heard of that test either.
Yeah, yeah. And you do the total tox burden, and then you learn, right? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So my body is fighting these petrochemicals. Where am I getting the pet? Oh my God, of course. I live or I work right next door to this place, and I smell the gasoline all day long through the open window. You'll play detective for yourself, and you'll find out where's it coming from.
Yeah, and it's a cumulative thing, and it's individual for each person is a little bit different what their burden load is and what their body's doing for it, and that's important to remember. And I think it can get really overwhelming too when we start to talk about toxins and the environment and our makeup and our food. And it is, and that's why, like the docuseries that you're presenting, we're not asking people to go from point A to point B all in one day. I always tell my students, like, okay, if you're using more toxic, chemicals or products, feminine products or makeup or whatever, like just phase out what you're using and then let's look at for something more friendly that doesn't have the chemicals. And I have a course that I teach my insulin resistant students, and the very first lesson is looking at like organic food versus not. And some of them question, well, what does this have to do with insulin resistance? Isn't it all the same? Like, no, like the basis of insulin resistance is inflammation. And we don't necessarily need to get super crazy about every single thing, but it is important to look at. And there's a lot of people that believe, well, organic is the same as conventional. And some people are just so sensitive to the sprays or whatever is coming in with certain produce and what is added into all of those highly processed foods that they really have no idea until they take them out how they're affecting them. So it's just going back to looking at what your toxic burden is, where it's coming from, and I'm sure that your docuseries can help people with that. But I saw leaky gut firsthand in my family just in the last like 6 months or so. My daughter, who is 20, has struggled with skin issues since puberty, and she lost her period and she was diagnosed with PCOS. And here I am, like the blood sugar expert, and we did all of these things to regulate her blood sugar and took out all these foods, and she healed some but not 100%. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Tabitha but she's a functional medicine gynecologist who specializes in leaky gut. And just as you said, almost every food that she was eating came back as a low level inflammatory food. And she's like, Mom, she's 20, she's in college, like she's a junior in college. She's like, I can't eat tomatoes, or, we suspected gluten on there. I can't eat eggs. I can't eat green beans, lettuce, like all the things that she was eating, which were all healthy food, but we had to pull them all out, let the gut heal the micro tears. And now she's on the other side 6 months later with her skin healing and feeling amazing. So I'm like, if you can do this at 20 in college, it's like other people can do this. There's hope. So she went and did the food sensitivity testing and figured out all of the things that were triggering her leaky gut and healed it. But yeah, it's a process. And I think the first step is just getting yourself educated on it, and what, like you explained it beautifully, what's leaky gut, why is it important, why is it causing my inflammation, and then what can we do about it. So last question. You wrote 2 books, Autoimmune Fix, which is the one that I read shortly after my son fell ill, and then You Can Fix Your Brain. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to touch on with the brain health? Because, women, especially going through perimenopause and menopause, their hormones are changing. They feel like they have this fuzzy brain and a lot of brain fog, and it's a time, just like puberty and pregnancy, like perimenopause is a huge hormonal change for women. So is there anything that you want us to know about brain health that we haven't talked about already?
Oh, thank you. Well, in the book, You Can Fix Your Brain, there are 36 to-dos, for example, when you learn that leaving your food in plastic containers overnight, the next day you eat the chicken, it's got phthalates in it, that the chemicals used to mold plastic get into the food. And you learn that, you say, oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, you're going to go to the book, and here's 3 URLs for glass storage containers. And you go to mileskimball.com or to Amazon or the other third one, I don't remember. And you say, I like those. And you order 3 round ones and 2 square ones and 1 for the pie, and you pay with the credit card, you hit send, you're done. Never again will you poison your family with minute amounts of poison unknowingly, but you were, because you're using plastic storage containers. Give the Tupperware to your husband to store nails in the garage.
Right.
That's what it's good for, right? So there's 36 to-dos there that all have an effect on this chronic inflammation that people get. When people come to me and they've got test results, they did a 90 food blood test panel to see what they're sensitive to, and it comes back positive to 20, 25 foods. And they say, oh my God, that's everything I eat. And I say, well, this is great. This is great. Congratulations. And they look at me and say, you got a leaky gut, and the macromolecules are getting through into the bloodstream, and your immune system trying to protect you is fighting all this. So let's heal the gut. And then we'll check in 6 months. You'll be sensitive to 2 foods, maybe 3. And those are the ones you keep out, right? I mean, that's how you look at this stuff. And the subtitle to that book, You Can Fix Your Brain, says it all. And we talk about it a lot. We have Bruce Lipton and many other world experts talking about this concept. And that is, the subtitle of that book is Just 1 hour a week to the best memory, productivity, and sleep you've ever had. That you tell your staff or your family, look, every Tuesday night after dinner, or every Sunday after services, whenever it is, but don't bother me for an hour. I'm going to spend an hour and learn more how we can be healthier. And then you go back to the book and you look at the URLs for glass storage containers, and you spend the hour and you buy the glass storage. It took an hour. You're done for the week. Next week, you look at houseplants to absorb the toxins in the air in your house. And you download the handout on the house plants and the pictures and you go to the nursery and you buy some of these little house plants. To NASA did the studies. 2 6-inch house plants in a 10 by 10 room absorb 74% of the toxins in the air. So you go buy 20 house plants for the 10 rooms in your house, every bathroom, every bedroom, the kitchen, the living room. And if you say, oh, I don't have a green thumb, they're going to die, then you'll buy more. That you just do what you have to protect your family. But every week you spend 1 hour. In the video that you'll get when you register of Fran Drescher, at one point she says, Dr. Tom, how do I get to the bathroom from here? And she had this sparkle in her eye. I said, well, it's right over there, right? It's right over there. But I knew what she was doing. I said, well, it's right there. Yes, but how do I get there? And I said, well, Fran, one step at a time. That's exactly right. You just put one foot in front of the other, one step at the time. And eventually, 6 months from now, you go to church and your friends see you and they haven't seen you. Wow, what happened to you? You look like $1,000,000, like your daughter in college 6 months later now. This is all clearing up for her. She feels great. Her energy's up. She's like trimmed down a little bit. You hear these stories every single day of people whose lives change as a result of putting one foot in front of the other, one step at a time.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be overwhelming when you do it that way. So, well, let's get people into this docuseries. We'll link it in the show notes. I have a special link that you provided for me and my listeners. So just go to the link and register. Is that all we do?
Yes, that's it.
Easy enough. And it starts April 4th. Is that the correct date?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. There's no way we can get through all of this in one podcast episode. I mean, we're just scratching the surface and at least giving you, like you said, the basics to understand the process that's going on and then how to begin to heal. But it'll go into much more detail with the docuseries. So I'm really excited about that. And that, you've done so much work in this field and you've been around for a long time. And like I said, you were one of the very first books before I knew about autoimmune illness or immunity. It was one of the very first books that I read. So I was really excited to interview you today. And we thank you for all your work. Anywhere else people can find you and follow you?
Well, our website is TheDr.com, thedoctor.com. Just don't spell the word doctor out, TheDr.com. And there's lots of videos and things, handouts there, and everyone's on all those tests are there. Everyone's welcome to go visit the site. But this event, oh, by the way, and although the inflammation equation launches on April the 4th, it's evergreen. So for those that will be listening to this after that date, you still can go to that same website here in the link that you've got, and you can watch it at any time. Your family can watch it. You can share it with people you care about because it'll save their lives without question. As they start thinking a little bit differently, they make different choices on a daily basis. And that's what we want. We want to create the paradigm shift where people just think differently. So the question becomes, well, what should I order on this menu? Well, let's see. I want less inflammation. So although I really want the lasagna, I'm going to go for this instead, right? And you make those choices every once in a while, and it just becomes your lifestyle, and you feel like $1,000,000. And then when you go back and next time you order, well, I'm going to have lasagna today because I've been good for 3 weeks. And then the next day you feel terrible. I can't tell you how happy I am when patients say, oh, doc, I went out and had some pizza and I felt terrible, or my migraines came back. Oh, I'm so glad. Congratulations, because now you know. You know. You've cleaned up your body. You're functioning better than you have in years. You look great. And the next day you feel terrible. It's up to you, man. Whatever you want. But I've done my job. I've shown you how to have healthy vitality for the rest of your life.
Yes. And every day. It's like we don't want to just be 90. Like we want to feel well living to 90 or beyond.
And we talk about that. The World Health Organization tells us that the average is the last 10.3 years of your life are not healthy. You are with disease. And that means 10 years, a decade of on medications, can't walk up the hill, can't dance with your granddaughter at her wedding, whatever it should be, but you are not healthy. The average is 10 years. And our goal is to reduce that dramatically so that you've got vitality throughout your entire life.
Yeah, let's reduce it to 10 days. Wouldn't that be marvelous from 10?
Exactly right. That's my goal, is that my energy level stays, my body function stays, and then I just go really
Yeah,
quick.
yeah,
I want the sharp drop,
yeah.
not the slow gradual deterioration where you're put in a nursing home and you sit around all day and don't have the energy to go out for walks or have a life.
Yeah. Well, we'll teach them how to do it. And I'm sure a lot of people, it is such a paradigm shift, and sometimes it happens really slowly, but same thing. It's like, I'm sure people look at me like I'm a total nutcase, but like, hey, I feel good. I'm serving
Yeah.
my body. It doesn't bother me that I'm not eating, sugar and gluten. Like, it bothers you more than it bothers me. So
Right,
I just
right.
like to feel well. So that's what I'm
There
doing.
you go. There you
Thanks
go.
so much for coming on today. It was a wonderful interview. People are going to learn a ton, and we're going to send them to the docuseries. Like you said, it's evergreen, it's there. So if you're missing the April 4th date, certainly go and sign up. So thanks so much for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much.